My name is Heidi. And this is the story of how the man who promised to protect me stood frozen while his family destroyed my mother's memory in front of 300 strangers. I was 9 years old when I lost both my parents in a car accident. The dress I wore to my engagement party was the last thing my mother ever wore before she died. And on the night I was supposed to celebrate the beginning of my new life, my future sister-in-law grabbed that dress and ripped it clean off my shoulder. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was Sullivan, my fiancé. The man who dropped to one knee by the Sacramento River and swore he would stand by my side through every storm. He watched his mother scream that I looked like a homeless beggar. He watched his sister tear the hand-stitched lace my mother sewed days before she died. And when my eyes met his, pleading for him to say something. Anything. He looked away and stepped backward into the crowd. He left me completely alone. I thought I knew what humiliation felt like. I was wrong. Because the moment after I lost everything, the massive oak doors of that ballroom burst open, and the man who raised me walked in. The Vance family had no idea who he was, but they were about to find out. I still remember the exact sound of my mother's dress ripping apart. It was a sickening, wet tear that echoed off the crystal chandeliers and marble floors of the Grand Meridian Ballroom, but what hurt even more was the silence of a man who promised to protect me, who swore he would stand by my side through every storm, who watched his own sister violently assault me and then took a deliberate step backward into the shadows. We're a wealthy family and you showed up to your own engagement party in a cheap dress. My future mother-in-law screamed at me in front of 300 of Sacramento's most powerful people. My future sister-in-law yanked the fabric of my shoulder so hard that the hand-stitched lace my mother had sewn just days before she died tore completely open. She spat. She's trying to humiliate our family. My fiancé just lowered his head and said nothing. Nothing. That was the moment the last illusion I had about Sullivan shattered into a million pieces. That was the moment I realized I had been a fool. A naive girl who believed that living a humble life would shield her from superficial and greedy people. How wrong I was. How catastrophically, devastatingly wrong. But what happened next changed everything. Because when my powerful grandfather walked into that ballroom, the Vance family would learn a lesson they would never, ever forget. My name is Heidi. And this is the story of how I lost everything, discovered who I truly was, and watched the people who humiliated me lose everything they had. If you love stories where arrogant and toxic people get the instant karma they deserve, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a satisfying ending. I lost my parents in a tragic car accident when I was 9 years old. My father, Michael, was a brilliant architect, and my mother, Laura, was a former ballet dancer who had given up her career to raise me. On the night they died, they were driving back from my father's gallery opening. A drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into their sedan at 60 miles per hour. My mother survived for exactly 11 minutes at the scene. The paramedics later told my grandfather that her last words were, "Take care of my baby girl." After their death, my grandfather Harold raised me in his 15,000 square foot mansion overlooking the Sacramento River. He built a massive hospitality empire from nothing, starting with a single motel and growing it into a multi-billion-dollar corporation that owns 50 luxury hotels across the country. 3 years ago, I made a decision that shocked him. I refused to step into a life of privilege without understanding how the real world operates. I wanted to move to a rented apartment in the city, work an ordinary job, and learn the true value of hard work and money before taking over his legacy. I promised him I would not use our family name or wealth to solve any problems. He respected my independence and agreed to completely hide my true identity. I bought a beat-up Honda Civic for $1, $500 cash. It had a rattling engine and a dented bumper. The first time I drove it, the check engine light came on within 20 minutes. I nearly cried. But I was determined. My new life in the city began with a cramped studio apartment on the outskirts of downtown. The rent was $875 a month. For the first time in my life, I had to budget for groceries, calculate rent, and count my tips to pay for gas. I genuinely believed living a humble life would shield me from superficial and greedy people. I never expected that my choice would lead me straight into the most humiliating night of my life. I got a job as a front desk receptionist at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a bustling luxury property in the heart of the city's financial district. My shifts were brutal. I worked rotating schedules, sometimes waking up at 4:30 a.m. for a morning shift, and other times working until 2 a.m. handling late-night check-ins from exhausted business travelers. The physical exhaustion was overwhelming. My feet would ache for hours after my shift ended. My back screamed from standing at the front desk for 10 hours straight. But it felt incredibly liberating. I loved the complete anonymity. Nobody looked at me and saw billionaire Harold Sterling's granddaughter. They just saw a hard-working girl trying to make ends meet. My coworkers became my friends. Kevin, the bellman who had been working at the hotel for 15 years, taught me how to deal with difficult guests. Smile, apologize, and never let them see you sweat, he would say. One evening in my 3rd month, a guest screamed at me for 30 minutes because his room wasn't ready. Even though he had arrived 6 hours before check-in time, I stayed calm, apologized, and offered him a complimentary drink at the bar. Kevin pulled me aside afterward and said, "You handled that like a pro. Most people would have cried." I smiled. At that moment, I realized that living a simple life was teaching me resilience, patience, and the true value of earned respect. But I had no idea that the hotel was about to become the backdrop for a series of events that would change my life forever. I met Sullivan Vance at a massive corporate tech mixer, hosted in the Grand Meridian's main banquet hall. He was a software engineer attending the event with his company's executive team, while other guests were loud, demanding, and entitled. Sullivan completely stood out. He was polite, soft-spoken, and possessed a remarkably gentle demeanor during a particularly chaotic evening. A frustrated VIP guest yelled at me over a booking error that was entirely his own fault. The man's face was turning purple with rage. Sullivan quietly stepped in, handed me a cup of coffee, and offered a reassuring smile until the angry man walked away. We started talking during my break. He asked about my job, my dreams, and my favorite books. He didn't brag about his salary or his tech company. He genuinely listened when I spoke. He asked for my number before the night ended. I remember driving home that night feeling light, hopeful, like maybe I had found someone real in a world full of people wearing masks. Our relationship blossomed quickly. Sullivan was the exact opposite of the cutthroat, arrogant men I grew up around in my grandfather's elite corporate circles. He never bragged about his achievements. He remembered my favorite takeout order, a chicken curry from the Thai place down the street. He always made sure I got home safely after my late-night shifts. He would leave little notes on my bedside table. Things like, "You look tired today. I'm proud of you. And can't wait to see you tomorrow." I genuinely believed I had found a safe harbor, a man who valued character over bank accounts. But looking back, the warning signs were always there. I simply chose to ignore them. The first red flag appeared just 2 months into our relationship. We were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant when his phone buzzed. His mother's name flashed on the screen. Sullivan immediately dropped his fork, apologized profusely, and stepped outside to take the call. He returned 20 minutes later, completely ignoring my silent frustration, and the pattern would only get worse. Sullivan was the textbook definition of a mama's boy. His mother, Rita, dictated his schedule, his daily choices, and his overall mood. If Rita called while we were watching a movie, the movie would be paused. If she wanted him to come over for dinner, our plans would be canceled. If she was upset, He would become anxious and withdrawn until she was happy again. One evening, we sat in my tiny living room, and I finally voiced my growing concerns. Sullivan had texted his mother 5 times in a single hour. Sullivan, I said, putting my coffee cup down on the table. You talk to your mom constantly. Does she actually know about me? What if she doesn't like the fact that I'm just a hotel receptionist living paycheck to paycheck? He did not look up from his screen immediately. When he finally did, he offered a dismissive, nervous laugh. My mom will understand. Don't worry, he replied smoothly. She just worries about me. Once she gets to know you, she will see how amazing you are. Just let me handle her. He always said that, let me handle her. He actively avoided any deep conversations about his family dynamics. He hated conflict and would do absolutely anything to keep the peace, especially if it meant keeping his mother happy. At the time, I mistook his extreme conflict avoidance for a peaceful nature. I thought his blind obedience to his mother just meant he was a loyal family man. But there was one moment that should have told me everything. We were at his apartment, and Rita called to ask him what he was having for dinner. He was 29 years old, but he answered her like a child being scolded. Yes. Mom. Yes. I'll eat something healthy. No. I haven't been drinking too much coffee. I love you too. I remember feeling a knot tighten in my stomach, but then he turned to me, smiled, and held my hand. She just worries, he said. I'll introduce you to her soon. I promise. I had no idea that his inability to stand up for himself would eventually shatter our relationship completely. A year after we met, Sullivan popped the question. He did not plan an extravagant flash mob or rent out a luxury yacht. Instead, he took me to a quiet park overlooking the Sacramento River at sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. The water shimmered in the golden light. We walked along the river path talking about our future plans. Suddenly, Sullivan stopped walking. He took a deep breath, dropped to one knee on the grass, and pulled out a small velvet box. The ring inside was modest. A simple band with a 0. 75 carat diamond. Priced at roughly $4. It was a fraction of what my grandfather spent on a single business lunch, but I did not care about the price. I cared about the man holding it. His hands shook slightly as he looked up at me. And he delivered the most heartfelt speech I had ever heard. Heidi, I know you've been through so much in your life. I know you lost your parents and you've been carrying that weight alone. I want to be the person who carries it with you. I want to protect you. Build a simple and happy life together. And always stand by your side. Tears filled my eyes. It was exactly the kind of genuine, unpretentious moment I had always wanted. I said yes, throwing my arms around his neck and holding on to him tightly. I believed with everything in me that our love could withstand any storm. I believed my secret identity did not matter. I believed Sullivan was different. I was so wrong. 1 week after accepting his proposal, Sullivan took me to his family's home to officially introduce me to his mother and sister. We pulled into the driveway of a large suburban house with a 3-car garage. The property featured flashy landscaping, a fountain that desperately wanted to be Versailles, and oversized white columns that felt like the family was trying too hard to project wealth they didn't actually have. Sullivan unlocked the front door and led me into a living room aggressively decorated with gold accents, faux cristal chandelier, and portrait paintings that were clearly prints, not originals. There I met my future mother-in-law Rita and my future sister-in-law Sabrina. Rita wore a stiff designer dress and a heavy pearl necklace for a simple family dinner. Her makeup wasn't homey. It was a mask, perfectly applied, emotionless, and cold. Sabrina stood next to her holding a crystal wine glass. Her hair was styled in expensive beach waves. Her nails were freshly manicured, And her outfit cost more than my entire monthly paycheck. The very first thing Sabrina did was look me up and down. Her eyes darted straight to my handbag. As simple. Unbranded leather tote I had bought at a local market for $25. When she realized it lacked a recognizable luxury logo, her upper lip curled into a brief sneer. So, Heidi, Sabrina drawled, swirling her wine. I saw you pull up. Is that your car parked behind my Mercedes? Yes, I replied calmly. It is an older Honda Civic. Oh, Sabrina said, stretching the syllable out, loading it with pity. Well, it gets you from point A to point B. I suppose. I just could never deal with the maintenance on those vintage vehicles. I let the insults slide. I decided I would be the bigger person. For Sullivan, Rita had prepared an elaborate spread for the occasion. The dining room table was covered in polished silver cutlery, folded cloth napkins, and expensive china that looked like it was used for special occasions only. For the first 20 minutes of the meal, Rita played the role of a gracious high society hostess. She bragged extensively about her country club memberships, her charity galas, and Sabrina's supposedly thriving digital media company. I sat quietly, eating my food and offering polite nods. I didn't want to overshare or undershare. I just wanted to get through the evening. Then, Rita turned her sharp gaze entirely on me. Sullivan mentioned you work downtown. Heidi, Rita said, folding her hands on the table. Which corporate firm are you with? Are you in finance? Marketing. I put my fork down and met her eyes. I actually work as a hotel receptionist. The clinking of silverware abruptly stopped. Sabrina froze with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. The warm, inviting atmosphere vanished, instantly replaced by a suffocating chill. Rita stared at me, as if I had just announced I had a contagious disease. Her practiced welcoming smile completely dissolved. A receptionist, Rita repeated flatly. The word felt like poison in her mouth. I could feel the weight of the word pressing down on the room. Rita leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Let me understand this correctly. My son, who is a senior software engineer with a six-figure salary, wants to marry a hotel receptionist. Sabrina let out a laugh that sounded like a short, sharp breath. Oh, this is rich. Mom, did you know about this? I could feel Sullivan stiffen beside me. He didn't say anything. He just stared at his plate with an intensity that suggested he was praying for the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Rita's voice dropped into a cold, mocking tone. My son has a very promising career and an elite social circle. He needs a wife of the same caliber to support his growth. Someone who understands the demands of his lifestyle. She paused, letting the silence stretch to ensure her next words hit as hard as possible. I have nothing against honest labor, Heidi, but a hotel receptionist. Well, the gap is just a bit too far. How do you expect to stand beside him at industry events? What will his colleagues think? My heart pounded against my ribs. The sheer disrespect was staggering. I turned my head to look at Sullivan. This was his house. This was his mother insulting the woman he had just asked to marry him. I waited for him to speak up. I waited for him to defend my honor. To tell his mother that my job did not define my worth. Or to at least ask her to show some basic manners. Sullivan did absolutely nothing. He stared down at his plate. A deep flush crept up his neck, the color spreading from his jawline to his ears. Instead of confronting Rita, he let out a weak, awkward laugh. So, Sabrina. Sullivan stammered frantically, changing the subject. How is the new marketing campaign going for your company? Sabrina smirked at me before turning to answer her brother. Just like that, I was dismissed. The conversation shifted entirely to Sabrina's business ventures. I sat there in stunned silence. The man who promised to protect me just a week ago could not even find the courage to defend me against a rude comment at a dinner table. The rest of the evening dragged on in agonizing tension. I finished my meal mechanically, realization dawning on me exactly how little my dignity mattered in this household. When we got into the car to drive home, Sullivan tried to take my hand. I pulled it away. "Not tonight," I said. He didn't ask again. He just drove in silence. And I stared out the window, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. A few days later, Rita's assistant called to schedule a lunch meeting. She chose an upscale coffee shop downtown, a place with marble floors and lattes that cost more than my hourly wage. When I arrived, Rita was already seated, sipping an espresso with a thick manila folder resting on the table. She did not bother with pleasantries. The moment I sat down, she slid the folder across the marble surface. "Read it," she instructed flatly. I opened the folder. Inside was a prenuptial agreement drafted by her lawyers. The legal jargon was cold, calculated, and carefully designed to strip me of everything. It outlined a complete separation of assets. If a divorce occurred, I would waive all rights to alimony or spousal support. I would be solely responsible for my own debts and have absolutely no claim to any wealth Sullivan acquired during our marriage. It was an ironclad document, deliberately designed to ensure I walked away with absolutely nothing. I felt a sharp sting of insult, but I kept my composure. I closed the folder and pushed it slightly away. "This is very thorough," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It protects my son," Rita replied, leaning forward with a hard stare. "But that document only covers the legalities. If you truly want to marry into our family, there is an unwritten condition you must accept." I looked at her, waiting. "You will resign from that receptionist job immediately," Rita demanded. Her tone left no room for negotiation. "Having my daughter-in-law work a minimum wage service job is a total embarrassment to our social standing. You will stay at home, manage the household, and focus entirely on supporting Sullivan's career. You will not embarrass us by carrying luggage or answering phones for strangers." The sheer audacity of her demand left me completely speechless. She wanted me to surrender my rights in writing and give up my only source of independent income. She was actively trying to trap me in a corner where I would be entirely dependent on her family's mercy. I placed my hand firmly on the folder and pushed it back across the table. "I am not signing this," I said clearly. "And I am certainly not quitting my job." Rita's eyes narrowed into sharp slits. "Excuse me, marriage is an equal partnership, not a corporate acquisition," I stated, holding my ground. "I do not want your son's money. I can support myself, but I refuse to sign a contract that treats me like a financial liability. And I will not give up my independence just to protect your fragile social image. If Sullivan wants to marry me, he marries all of me, including my career." Rita slammed her coffee cup down so hard that espresso splashed onto the marble table. "You arrogant little girl. You are just upset because you cannot secure our wealth. We will see what Sullivan has to say about your stubbornness." She grabbed her purse and stormed out, leaving me sitting alone at the table with the manila folder bulging between us. I sat there for a long moment, my heart racing. I knew that I had just made an enemy, but I refused to back down. I refused to let myself be treated like a threat, an inconvenience, or a gold digger. That evening, I waited for Sullivan in my apartment. My coffee had gone cold. My nerves were shot. I rehearsed my arguments, running through everything I wanted to say. The moment he walked through the door, I confronted him. I demanded to know why he allowed his mother to ambush me with an aggressively unfair contract and an ultimatum to ruin my career, instead of validating my anger or defending me. Sullivan let out a long, exhausted sigh. He rubbed his temples, dropped his briefcase, and collapsed onto the couch. "Heidi," Please. He groaned. Why do you have to make everything so incredibly difficult? I froze in my tracks. I am making things difficult. She asked me to waive all my rights and quit my job. She treated me like a criminal trying to rob you. It is just a piece of paper. Sullivan argued, refusing to meet my furious gaze. My mom worries. That is just how she operates. And honestly, she has a point about the job. You work crazy hours for terrible pay? I make enough for both of us. Just quit the hotel. Sign the document. And let her have this win. It is not a big deal. Let her have this win, I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. Sullivan. She is treating me like a gold digger. She is trying to strip away my independence. So I have nowhere to go. She is just trying to protect the family. Sullivan snapped, raising his voice louder than I had ever heard him. He immediately caught himself, lowering his head and pacing the floor. Look. Just sign it. Okay. Other women would be thrilled to stay home. Just please her to keep the peace. I don't want to deal with the fighting anymore. Other women, I repeated. Other women would be thrilled. Sullivan. I'm not other women. I'm supposed to be your fiancé. Your partner. The woman you love. He didn't answer. He just walked into the bedroom and shut the door behind him, leaving me standing alone in the living room, staring at the closed door in total silence. He did not care about my dignity, my career, or my feelings. He only cared about avoiding conflict with his mother. At that exact moment, a massive crack formed in the foundation of our relationship. I felt it deep in my bones. The damage felt entirely irreversible. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? Because I was about to learn that the choice I made would cost me everything. Since I absolutely refused to sign the agreement, Rita shifted her tactics to controlling my public image for the engagement party. 3 days before the event, a massive delivery box arrived at my apartment. The packaging bore the logo of an ultra-luxury boutique in the wealthiest district in the city. I opened the lid and pulled back the tissue paper. Inside lay a dress that represented everything I despised about superficial wealth. It was heavily covered in cheap-looking rhinestones, featured an uncomfortably revealing neckline that left nothing to the imagination, and came in a blindingly loud shade of teal. It looked less like an engagement outfit and more like a desperate cry for attention. Before I could even put the lid back on the box, my phone rang. Rita's name flashed on the screen. I assume the courier dropped off my package. Rita stated the second I answered the call. She didn't bother saying hello. I received the box. Yes, I replied, staring down at the gaudy fabric. But I am not wearing this. Rita let out a sharp, condescending laugh. You do not have a choice in this matter. From now on, you are a part of the Vance family. I will decide what you wear. You need to look the part, so you do not embarrass us in front of our high society guests. Put it on. Get it tailored if you must. And wear it on Saturday. I am perfectly capable of dressing myself, I said firmly, keeping my voice level. I already have an outfit prepared for my engagement party. I do not care what cheap rags you bought from a discount rack. Rita snapped, dropping her polite facade completely. You will wear what I bought you, or you will regret it. She slammed the phone down, disconnecting the call. I tossed my phone onto the couch and walked directly to my bedroom closet. I reached past my daily work clothes and carefully pulled out a heavy protective garment bag. I unzipped it slowly. Inside hung a beautifully tailored classic dress. It was modest, elegant, and timeless. It did not have flashy diamonds or a designer label. It was made of a soft cream silk fabric that shimmered slightly in the light. It was my mother's dress. It was the exact outfit she wore on her final birthday. A beautiful garden party she had in our backyard, just weeks before the tragic accident that took her and my father away from me. I had kept it preserved for over a decade, wrapped in tissue paper and sealed in the garment bag to protect it from dust and light. To the outside world, it might look slightly vintage or plain, but to me, it was a priceless treasure. Wearing it was my way of ensuring my mother could be there with me on one of the most important days of my life. No amount of money, and certainly no screaming demands from Rita, could force me to replace this profound emotional connection with a piece of flashy fabric. I hung the dress on the back of my bedroom door, feeling completely secure in my decision. But I knew the battle wasn't over. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Sullivan. "Did you seriously start a fight with my mother over a piece of clothing?" Sullivan demanded. He sounded furious. It was the very first time he had ever raised his voice at me in such an aggressive manner. "I did not start a fight," I explained, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "Your mother sent me a dress that I am not comfortable wearing. I told her I already have my own dress for the party." "Why do you have to make everything so incredibly difficult?" Sullivan yelled into the phone, completely ignoring my side of the story. "My mother spent a lot of money on that outfit to make you look presentable. Will it kill you to just wear the dress she picked? Stop being so stubborn and just do what she says." My chest tightened. "Sullivan, the dress I am wearing belonged to my late mother. It is the last thing she wore before she died. I want her memory with me. Nobody cares about some old vintage clothes." He groaned in intense frustration, completely dismissing my trauma. "You are embarrassing my mother. Wear the dress she bought? Or do not bother showing up to the party." A heavy, suffocating silence fell between us. The man on the other end of the line was a complete stranger. He cared more about his mother's fragile ego than the memory of my dead parents. I did not argue. I did not yell back. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the end button. I walked back into the bedroom, looked at my mother's dress hanging on the door, and made a silent vow to protect it at all costs. On the evening of the engagement party, I arrived at the hotel wearing my mother's vintage dress. The clock on my phone read 7:47 p.m. The party was scheduled to start at 8 p.m., but I wanted to be early to help greet the guests. The Grand Meridian ballroom looked magnificent. Crystal chandeliers blazed brightly, casting rainbows of light across the polished marble flooring. Floral arrangements towered on every table, and a string quartet played soft classical music in the corner. I stepped through the doors with my head held high. The dress carried the faint, comforting scent of lavender, my mother's favorite perfume, giving me the strength I needed to face the Vance family. But the moment my heels clicked against the polished marble flooring, the ambient chatter inside the massive room abruptly died. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me. The wealthy elite of the city, dressed in their flashy designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, began to whisper. A harsh, judgmental murmur rippled through the crowd. Some guests blatantly pulled out their smartphones, pointing their cameras directly at me, their faces twisted in amusement. I heard scattered mocking laughter, cruel gasps, and the distinct sound of camera shutters clicking in rapid succession. They were recording my entrance as if I were some kind of pathetic circus spectacle. I held my head high, but my heart was racing. This was not the warm welcome I had dreamed of. This was a feeding frenzy. And I was the prey. Before I could even process the hostile environment, Rita aggressively pushed her way to the front of the crowd. Her face was twisted in absolute rage, completely abandoning her usual high society grace. She did not care about keeping her voice down or maintaining a polite facade. She wanted an audience. "What is the meaning of this?" Rita screamed, her shrill voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I explicitly told you what to wear tonight. We're a wealthy family and you showed up to your own engagement party in a cheap dress." I stood my ground, clutching my small purse, refusing to let her intimidate me. "Rita, this is my mother's dress. It means everything to me. I am not changing. It belongs in a dumpster. Rita spot, gesturing wildly to the crowd of recording guests. Look at you. You look like a homeless beggar who wandered into the wrong building. You are intentionally trying to make a fool out of us in front of our most important business partners. I spent thousands of dollars to make you look presentable. And you show up in this disgusting, outdated rag just to defy me? The whispers around us grew louder, feeding Rita's toxic ego. Then, Sabrina stepped forward from the shadows, holding a glass of champagne. Her eyes gleamed with pure malice. She's trying to humiliate our family. Sabrina yelled, making sure every single guest in the back of the room heard her clearly. She wants everyone to think we do not take care of her. She is just a pathetic gold digger throwing a tantrum. Sabrina closed the distance between us in 2 quick, aggressive strides. She did not just yell. She lunged at me. She reached out and violently grabbed the fabric of my right shoulder. Take it off. Sabrina hisset, pulling the fabric with all her strength. I gasped. Stop. I tried to pull away from her grip. But Sabrina yanked harder. A sickening, ripping sound echoed sharply through the silent ballroom. The delicate lace on my right shoulder. The exact piece of lace my mother had carefully hand-sewn just days before she died. Tore completely open. The fabric gave way entirely, leaving my bare shoulder exposed to the cold air. The precious heirloom was permanently ruined beyond repair. A collective gasp erupted from the crowd. Flashbulbs went off blindly as people recorded the assault. The sheer brutality of the unprovoked act left me momentarily paralyzed in shock. I frantically clamped my hand over my torn shoulder, desperately trying to hold the shredded pieces of my mother's memory together. My chest heaved. Hot tears of absolute humiliation and devastation threatened to spill. But I bit the inside of my cheek and refused to let them fall. I turned my head desperately, searching the crowd for the man who had promised to protect me. I found Sullivan standing just a few feet away. He saw everything. He heard his mother scream at me. He watched his sister violently tear my clothes. This was the defining moment. This was the exact second a real man would step in, shield his fiancé, and demand respect. Instead, Sullivan looked at my torn dress, then looked at his raging mother. He swallowed hard, his face turning completely pale. When my pleading eyes locked onto his, he panicked. He immediately averted his gaze, staring intensely at the floor. Then he took a very deliberate, cowardly step backward. Melting into the shadows of the crowd, he completely abandoned me to the wolves without saying a single word. In that agonizing moment, every single illusion I had about Sullivan shattered completely. He was not a kind gentleman. He was a spineless coward. A man who valued his mother's toxic approval over basic human decency. I stood there, my shoulder bare, my mother's dress hanging off me like a wounded flag. Surrounded by hundreds of strangers pointing and laughing, Rita opened her mouth to deliver another vicious insult. She clearly intended to finish breaking my spirit right then and there. Sabrina was smirking, holding up her champagne glass in a mock toast. The crowd pressed in closer, eager to capture every moment of my humiliation. I felt completely, utterly alone. No parents, no grandfather, no fiancé, just me and my shredded dignity. But then, something shifted in the atmosphere. The crowd's energy changed. A low rumbling sound grew outside the ballroom doors, and in the next moment, everything changed. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed through the room. The massive, solid oak doors of the ballroom burst open with terrifying force. The heavy, rhythmic thud of leather shoes striking the polished marble floor immediately froze every single eye in the ballroom. The oppressive silence was instant. My grandfather, Harold Sterling, walked through the grand archway. 2 massive bodyguards in immaculate dark suits flanked him, scanning the room with cold precision. The sheer authority radiating from him forced the murmuring crowd to part like the Red Sea. The guests who had been recording my humiliation quickly lowered their phones. instinctively sensing the dangerous shift in the atmosphere. Harold did not announce his presence. He did not address the whispering elite. His piercing gaze locked directly onto me. He saw my torn dress. He saw the exposed shoulder where my mother's handmade lace used to be. His jaw tightened into a rigid line. He walked straight past Rita and Sabrina, completely ignoring their existence. When he reached me, he stopped, without a single word. He unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket, took it off, and gently draped it over my shoulders. Carefully covering the ruined fabric, the heavy material instantly shielded me from the glaring eyes of the crowd. His warm, steady hand squeezed my arm, silently promising that the nightmare was over. Then Harold slowly turned to face the Vance family. His eyes were dark and lethal. "Who dared to do this?" he roared. The booming sound of his voice shook the crystal glasses on the nearby tables. Rita blinked, her face contorting in pure confusion. Sabrina took a nervous step back. The arrogant smirk was completely wiped off her face. They clearly had no idea who this imposing man was. Rita, desperately trying to salvage her shattered authority in front of her high society friends, puffed out her chest. "Excuse me." Rita snapped, though her voice wavered. "Security should have stopped you at the door. This is a private engagement party for the Vance family. Who do you think you are? Barging in here and shouting at us." Harold let out a low, menacing laugh. The sound sent chills down my spine. He looked around the extravagant ballroom, tracing the gold leaf ceilings and the massive chandeliers, before bringing his deadly gaze back to Rita. "Your private party," Harold repeated, his tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are standing inside my building. You are drinking my champagne. You are occupying a property that belongs entirely to my corporation." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The guests leaned forward, holding their breath. "And you just laid your filthy hands on my granddaughter." The silence in the room became thick and suffocating. Rita's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Sabrina's hands began to shake violently. Harold stepped forward, closing the distance between him and Rita. He projected his voice so every single person in the massive hall could hear the undeniable truth. "My name is Harold Sterling," he declared with absolute power. "I am the founder and chairman of the Sterling Hospitality Empire, which owns this exact hotel, along with 50 others across the country." A collective, echoing gasp swept through the hundreds of guests. The realization hit the room like a devastating shockwave. The poor hotel receptionist they had been ruthlessly laughing at just moments ago was actually the future owner of a multi-billion-dollar empire. "You looked at my granddaughter and saw a target," Harold continued, his voice cold as steel. "You saw a young woman living a humble life, working an honest job, and you decided she was beneath you. You thought you could bully her, control her, and strip away her dignity without facing any consequences." He pointed a strict finger at Rita. She chose to live simply to learn the true value of hard work. She wanted to know the real character of the people around her without the influence of money. And tonight, you showed her exactly who you are. You revealed your ugly, greedy, and arrogant true colors. I looked at Sullivan. His face was a mask of pure terror. He realized that he had not just lost a fiancé, he had lost access to a billionaire's fortune. The transformation of the Vance family was spectacular to witness. Rita stumbled backward, her knees visibly buckling under her weight. She desperately grabbed the edge of a catering table to keep herself from collapsing onto the floor. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and sickly. Sabrina was trembling so hard that she dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor, but nobody moved. She stared at her own hands in sheer, unadulterated horror. Finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of her actions, she had just physically assaulted a billionaire heiress in the middle of her own hotel. An heiress whose grandfather owned the very building they were standing in, Sullivan. who had cowardly retreated into the shadows when I needed him the most, suddenly pushed his way to the front. His eyes were wide with panic. The reality that he had just allowed his mother and sister to publicly destroy his relationship with a billionaire heiress was visibly tearing him apart. "Heidi, I can explain," he started, reaching for me. His voice cracked. Harold stepped between us, blocking his path. Sullivan opened his mouth to speak again, but Harold silenced him with a single, sharp glare. The absolute terror radiating from the Vance family was palpable. Harold did not waste another second on their shock. He turned slightly, raising a single hand. The hotel's general manager, who had been standing nervously near the entrance, immediately rushed forward holding a digital tablet. "Mr. Chairman," the manager said, bowing respectfully, "revoke the Vance family's VIP membership cards immediately," Harold commanded, his voice cold and purely transactional. "They are permanently banned from this property and all affiliated locations." "Yes, sir," the manager said, typing rapidly on the tablet. "Contact the legal department first thing Monday morning." Harold continued, "I want a full review of all vendor contracts. Find the termination clauses for Sabrina Vance's media company and sever all business ties. We do not renew contracts with violent liabilities." Sabrina let out a loud, pathetic wail. Her company was already drowning in massive debt. Losing a corporate client like the Sterling Empire would guarantee her immediate and highly public bankruptcy. Furthermore, Harold added, looking directly at Rita, "cancel all corporate discounts applied to tonight's event. Bill them for 100% of the venue and catering costs. If they fail to pay the invoice by tomorrow afternoon, send it straight to collections." Harold then stepped closer to Sabrina, his eyes completely devoid of mercy. "And consider yourself incredibly lucky I do not call the police right now," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Ripping a woman's clothes off her body constitutes battery and willful destruction of property. If you ever come near my granddaughter again, my lawyers will bury you so deep in civil lawsuits, you will never recover." The sheer weight of the consequences crushed the Vance women. Rita, the woman who had demanded I scrub floors and quit my job, literally dropped to her knees. She grabbed the edge of my grandfather's tailored trousers, weeping openly. "Please, sir, we made a terrible mistake," she sobbed. "Heidi, please forgive us. We didn't know who you were." I looked down at her tear-stained face. "That is exactly the problem." "Rita," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "You only respect people when you know their bank account balance. You looked at a hardworking girl and decided she was beneath you. You judged her by her job title instead of her character. And that judgment just cost you everything." Sullivan finally broke through the crowd. His face was entirely flushed with panic and desperate regret. He reached his hand out toward me, his fingers trembling wildly. "Heidi, please." Sullivan stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. "I am so sorry. I didn't know they would go this far. Just give me a chance. Let me explain everything. We can fix this. I love you." I looked at the man I had almost married. I did not feel angry anymore. Just an overwhelming sense of clarity. With one swift motion, I slid the modest engagement ring off my finger. I stepped forward and pressed the cold metal directly into his trembling palm. "There is absolutely nothing to explain." "Sullivan," I said firmly, ensuring every single word cut deep. "When your mother handed me an unfair contract to ruin my career, you told me to just sign it. When she insulted my late mother's memory, you yelled at me to obey her. And when your sister physically attacked me in front of hundreds of people, you took a step back and hid." Sullivan swallowed hard, thick tears welling in his eyes. He tried to speak, but no words came out. What I need is a man who dares to stand beside me during the storm. I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. I do not need a coward who only finds his courage when he realizes who my grandfather is. We are completely done. I turned my back on Sullivan forever. I slipped my arm through my grandfather's arm. Together, we walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving the Vance family to face their financial ruin and public disgrace alone. The heavy oak doors closed behind us, shutting out their pathetic apologies for good. In the elevator, Harold didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his hand resting on my shoulder, his jaw tight. I'm sorry, I finally whispered. I should have told you. I should have let you protect me. No, Harold said, his voice rough with emotion. You needed to learn your own way. I just wish you hadn't had to learn it like this. We drove back to his mansion in silence. The car was warm and quiet, and I felt the tears finally begin to fall. Silent tears of grief, exhaustion, and relief. The next morning, my grandfather's team sent me a report. Rita and Sabrina had been banned from all 51 Sterling properties. Sabrina's media company had collapsed within 48 hours. And the lawsuit for the torn dress was being prepared. Sullivan called me 17 times in the first week. Then the text started. Desperate. Rambling apologies. Declarations of love. Excuses. I never responded. Weeks passed. The tabloids had a field day with the story. But my grandfather's legal team quickly shut down any mention of my name. I went back to work at the Grand Meridian, but not at the front desk. Harold had appointed me as the new assistant manager of guest relations, a position I had to earn through training and hard work. I took the position seriously, not because it was a promotion, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I had learned something, that I was stronger than the girl who let a man like Sullivan into her life. Slowly, the wounds began to heal. The torn dress sat in my closet, carefully preserved in a shadow box on my bedside table. I kept it to remind myself that real love is not about looks or money or titles. It is about showing up during the hard times. Sullivan faded into obscurity, at least in my world. I heard through the grapevine that he lost his job at the startup after the scandal broke. Rita had to sell the house to pay off the debts from the engagement party. Sabrina fled to another state to escape her mounting lawsuits. And I inherited my mother's courage, my grandfather's wisdom, and my father's compassion. Every time I see a woman being talked down to, dismissed, or humiliated, I see the girl standing in the ballroom, biting her cheek to stop herself from crying. Life always tests the people around you. Never judge someone by their job title or bank account. Character is revealed by how people treat those they believe have nothing to offer them. Always cherish the ones who stand fiercely by your side during a storm, because they are the only ones who deserve to be there when the sun shines. Tonight, I finally told this story to my husband, a kind man named Alex who works as a nurse at the city hospital. He held my hand, listened to every word, and when I finished, he kissed my forehead and simply said, "You deserved better." He is right. We all deserve better. Better partners. Better friends. Better families. But the only way to get better is to recognize our own worth and refuse to settle for less. Thank you all for listening to my story until the end. I am the person I am today. Not because of the money I have, but because of the scars I carry. They remind me who I am. They remind me what I survived. They remind me to never, ever let anyone make me feel small again. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have pressed charges against Sabrina for tearing your mother's dress? Would you have walked away from Sullivan sooner? Or would you have given him a second chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And I will see you in the next story. Until then, stay strong, stay kind, and never let anyone dim your light. I slipped my arm through my grandfather's and walked out of that ballroom, leaving the Vance family to face their disgrace alone. Within weeks, Sabrina's company collapsed under the weight of canceled contracts. Rita sold the house to pay for the night she had planned so cruelly, and Sullivan faded into quiet obscurity. I never answered a single one of his desperate calls, but the true lesson wasn't about their ruin. It was about my own awakening. I spent years believing that love meant tolerating the intolerable, that being understanding meant swallowing disrespect. That night in the ballroom taught me something I now carry. Close character is revealed in how people treat those they believe have nothing to offer them. The ones who abandon you in your hardest moment are not your people at all. I am married now to a kind man named Alex, a nurse who never needed to see a bank statement to know my worth. That is the love we all deserve. The kind that stands beside you when the storm is loud and the room is cruel. If you have ever been dismissed or made to feel small, I hope you remember true power does not roar. It moves in silence. Walk away. Hold your head high. And let your absence be the loudest thing they ever hear. Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the truth always finds a way to win.